Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is automating on-premises data gateway installs. Let's go. Okay, so why is this topic important? So gateways provide connectivity between the Power Platform cloud services such as Power Apps and Power Automate with your local network. Your local network might be your laptop on a public internet such as your home, or it could be to a private data center or even a public cloud, Microsoft or otherwise. Now, when it comes to RPA, we do have a dependency on the on-premises data gateway, which will require organizations to have additional gateways that they may not have already have in their environment itself. And so when you think about the fact that you're going to need to install more of these gateways, certainly there's a few things that you want to take care of that can be accomplished through automation itself. So what organizations are typically interested in is who can install a gateway. You may not want to have everyone in your organization to be able to install a gateway, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, even if I take off my Microsoft hat and I think about, you know, if you were trying to secure an organization, restricting who can install them seems like a reasonable approach. It's one of those things where you want to ensure that people that have a valid business reason to use it can use it, but you don't want it to spiral out of control as well. And so as part of who can go ahead and install the gateway, we also have some additional restrictions that can be put in place, such as what are the data sources that people are going to be able to access by using this gateway. And so that's another thing that we can achieve through automation that we're going to talk about today. Also, enforcing a naming convention, you may want to ensure that the gateway is named in a consistent manner that helps you govern and manage it throughout the enterprise. So this could be things like using the name of the computer that the gateway is going to be running on, or it even could be tagged to the specific user, or it could be a combination of both. But through automation, you can actually enforce that naming convention that just gives you more uniformity across the organization. And then lastly, we do have the backup and recovery key. And so this is used whenever you need to say, take a gateway from one machine and move it to another machine, but you don't want to break all of the existing settings and connections that do exist. And so having a consistent or at least uniform backup and recovery key seems like a good idea. And if you leave it up to end users to go ahead and set this value, naturally everyone's going to set something differently, which will reduce the value of that capability itself. Before we dive deeper into the content, I wanted to let you know about an emerging community found at serverlessnotes.com. This is a community resource that covers best practices, tips, and latest announcements built on contributions by technology enthusiasts from around the globe. On serverlessnotes.com, you'll find content related to Power Automate, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Service Bus, Azure Functions, and much, much more. Serverlessnotes.com is brought to you by Serverless 360, a portal that is focused on operations and support for Microsoft Azure serverless resources. Now, this is a complementary tool to the Azure portal, and it helps organizations in supporting Azure serverless applications. You can find out more about Serverless 360 at serverless360.com. Okay, I do want to leave you with a reference here. I will include this link in the description, but this post and the links contained within this post did help me come up with the solution itself. So do want to share that with you. Okay, so let's talk about two modes. The two modes in which we can go ahead and use PowerShell automation in order to go ahead and automate the installation of our on-premises data gateways. Now, when we talk about a silent install, so basically an install where we don't have a GUI, we don't have any buttons to click, we can go ahead and use a service principal to enable a silent install itself. In addition, we also have interactive mode, and this is where you would essentially log in with username and password, and you can go ahead and use these same scripts to automate your workloads. Now, I'm going to focus more so on the service principal, but I will show you the command in the links where I will give you the code that's being used here. Essentially, all you're going to have to do is comment one line and uncomment another, and then all of this will work in interactive mode. Now, regardless of the mode that you choose, you are going to need tenant admin privileges to run these scripts. This is in part due to an assumption about a managed gateway installers list being used. In addition, you can't expect essentially a just an end user level permission giving you the ability to do the things that we're going to go ahead and perform here. Okay, so when I talk about managed gateway installers, what does that really mean? So inside of the Power Platform Admin Center, we do have the ability to manage gateway installers. And what that means is when you turn this setting on, restrict users in your organization from installing gateways, what you then do is you provide a list of users that are then able to go ahead and install the gateway itself. So that's great. That's a good feature. Oftentimes what this means is there might be an administrative community within an organization and you want to give people access to do that. And that's fine, that works, that's a good governance practice. But what if we wanted to have a silent mode? We wanted to install all of these gateways from a silent perspective. What we can't do here is we can't go ahead and include a service principal. So what we're going to do is we're going to use PowerShell to enable that specific scenario. And so once we go ahead and add our service principal to a list of members that can install gateways, then we can go ahead and run a script as that service principal. So if you're not interested in service principals, you don't need to do our first step. You don't need to do this. You just need to be aware of this. What you would want to ensure is that your account or the account that you will be using in an interactive install process is a member of this group. And as naturally as a result, you do need to be an admin to perform this function. Okay, so let's talk about service principal. You don't need to do these steps if you're going to use interactive mode. So I do want to call that out. But for those of you interested in using a service principal approach, these are prerequisites that you will need to go ahead and follow. So step one is you're going to need to go into Azure Active Directory. You're going to need to click on app registrations, and then you're going to need to go ahead and click on new registration. At this point, you're going to be asked for a name of your application. And in addition, you will be asked for a redirect, which is an optional value, and we don't need to provide in this case. Now, once we've gone ahead and created our app registration or our service principal, I've called mine Power BI Gateway Installer. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. But there's going to be some information that we need to go ahead and obtain, and we will use this in our PowerShell scripts later on. So go ahead, open up Notepad or OneNote, whatever makes sense, and copy these values into that location so that you can use them later. Number one, you're going to need the application or client ID. So go ahead and copy that. You're going to need your tenant ID. Go ahead and copy that. And then we're also going to need an object ID. Now the object ID is not this one, so don't copy this one. Go ahead over to Managed Application, then click into that, and then you're going to see this screen over here. Grab the object ID for the managed application itself. So go ahead and copy that to your text editor as well. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a secret. A secret is essentially a password, and we can go ahead and do that from the certificates and secrets screen. And then we'll go ahead and click on new secret, and then a password or a key will be automatically generated for us. It is obfuscated here, and as a result, you do want to protect that, and you need to copy that as well. You want to make sure you copy it the first time. When you come back, what you're going to see is it basically start out like this. You can actually go ahead and create new secrets, but best to copy it right up front when you do create it. So that's the secret side of things. The next thing we need to do is we need to provide our service principal or our Azure app registration with permissions to go ahead and provide some sort of function, right? In this case, it's going to be manipulating or calling the Power BI APIs. So what we do is we click on API permissions first, then we're going to go ahead and click on add a permission. We're going to go ahead and see this screen come up. So we can go ahead and click on Power BI. And then what's going to happen, there's going to be two options, two permissions that are available to us, and they are represented right here, tenant.read.all and tenant.readwrite.all. we need to ensure both of these settings are checked on, and then they will show up here within this screen. Now, there is an issue here though. Once again, this is why we need that admin privileges to do this stuff. We're going to see here that these API calls do require admin consent. As a result, an admin has to go ahead and click this button that will grant us this access for our app registration, and then as a result we'll see that that is enabled for us. So very important step. You won't get this won't work without this level of permission. Okay, now I mentioned this before when we're talking about the modes. So when you're using a service principal and when you're not using a service principal. So this will be inside of the script itself. You're going to see these lines, and the first one, connect data gateway service account, is going to use our information that we just created, right? The application ID, the client secret, and the tenant. So these are all variables that you're going to see inside of the PowerShell script, but those get passed in, and once we're logged in, then we can perform additional operations from a PowerShell perspective. Now, if you're not using Service Principal, you're just going to go ahead and use connect-data gateway service account, and then what's going to happen is you're going to get prompted with that typical Microsoft username and password prompt whenever you log into like a cloud application. So what will happen there is you're going to see a window pop up. You'll go ahead and authenticate, provided your authentication is successful. You're going to see a window that says, okay, you can now close this window, and within PowerShell, you will be good. Also note, when running PowerShell, always run within an admin session. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's get into a demo. Now, what are the goals for the demo? So number one, we're going to add a service principal as a managed installer. If you're not interested in service principals, as I mentioned before, don't worry about step number one. And then step number two is we're going to go ahead and install a gateway on a machine. We are going to assign use rights to an individual. Okay, so think about this. So we have a user, let's call them Tom. And we want Tom to be able to use this gateway. We don't want them to own it. We don't want them to be able to go ahead and administrate it, but we want to let them go ahead and connect to SQL Server in this instance. And as a result, we can go ahead and assign the individual use rights for that individual. If we're talking about RPA, we could go ahead and assign the UI flows permission for them to go ahead and to be able to use the gateway for desktop automation. Now, in addition, what we also want to do is we want to assign an admin group rights to this specific gateway itself. And so what we can do as part of our script is we can say, you know, Tom is going to be a user of this gateway, but let's go ahead and let's assign an administrative group to this as well. And so you might have like a center of excellence team or even an administrators team that you want the ability to go ahead and view these gateways, to be able to monitor them, and naturally, you know, also provide administrative functions such as if they needed to share or add additional permissions, you want that admin group the ability to go ahead and do that. So that's going to be a goal of the demo itself. Okay, so step one, I am in just an Azure VM machine, and what I am going to do now is I'm going to install a gateway on this specific machine, and I'm going to go ahead and use a service principal to go ahead and do that. If you don't need to if you're not planning on using service principal, you can ignore this step and we'll pick it up in step two. So I am using an administrative command prompt. The PowerShell commandlets that we are going to be using are PowerShell 7. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to just start a PowerShell 7 session itself. I'm going to go ahead now and run this script, and it's in the same folder that I'm currently operating within. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Set Managed Installer. Let's go ahead and let's run this. This will go ahead and add our service principal that we configured in Azure and give us the ability to go ahead and install gateways as a certified user of, like, as part of that managed installers gateway list. Now, do note you will not see this account show up there. This is more of a UI, UI challenge at this point. Do expect in the future that you'll be able to go ahead and search directly from the UI, but for now, we can use PowerShell to go ahead and work around that. So that's as simple as step 1 is. Note we do have these parameters that we do have to provide. I talked about those in the slides. So this is our secure key, our application ID, our installer ID, and our tenant ID. And this installer ID, remember, is our managed applications object ID, right? So that's where that value comes from. Okay, so that's great. We're done step number 1. Okay, now let's head over to step number 2. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to once again provide a set of parameters, and this is because we're going to use Service Principal to go ahead and log in. If we don't want to use Service Principal, all you need to do is comment that line out, uncomment this line, and that will provide an interactive login for us. Now what we're going to do is we're going to provide some parameters here. So we've got the login parameters, which we just spoke about. Then what we need to do is provide a gateway name. Now this could be anything, and this is where you can leverage PowerShell to figure out, a specific, say, user ID, or if you wanted to get the machine name, you can customize this to make sense for your organization. I'm just going to call my gateway automated gateway demo. Then what I'm going to do is provide a recovery key, and in this case, it's just going to be this specific value. So if I ever wanted to restore this gateway, I could go ahead and provide that key. Go ahead and create a key that makes most sense for you. Now these last 2 parameters are quite interesting. As I mentioned, as part of our goals, we're going to want to assign the right level of privileges for those specific users. And so these are going to be object IDs. These would be object IDs from an Azure AD perspective for a specific user and for a specific security group. And so you'd want to go ahead and retrieve those from the Azure portal. Just go ahead and find the user or the group, click on their properties, and you're going to see those values itself. So what we're going to do here is we are going to naturally go ahead and log in first. We're going to go ahead and accept the conditions. And basically this is just a bypassing that prompt. Then what we're going to do is we're going to configure the gateway. So we're going to go ahead and call the add data gateway cluster command, and we're going to provide these values that we've talked about here. I have added the overwrite existing gateway flag just because I've been doing this a few times, so feel free to include that if you want. Now this is a very important step right here, right? So we wanted to go ahead and define for our user, and this we'll call him Tom. We want to go ahead and just provide Tom with just SQL permissions. And so what we can do, and I've included a link here, I'll include it in the description of the video. You can see all of the different parameter names for the different data sources. So for example, there's going to be one called UI flows for RPA, but if you wanted to use HTTP, there's going to be a value for that, or Oracle, or other data sources as well. So go ahead and check that out. And what you were essentially doing is we're adding to a list, these different values, so that when we go ahead and assign that user, we're going to include those data sources as part of it. So that's the next step. We're now going to provide the permissions for our security group and for our user. So the first line is we're going to add a data gateway cluster user. We're going to provide the ID, the details, and the gateway object ID because we just created it. That's going to come from this step right here. We're going to provide then the principal object ID, and in this case, this is where we're going to provide our admin value. So the variable where we defined our security group, we're going to provide its object ID as an input parameter. By default, whenever you're an admin, the allowed data sources you want to provide as null, because it's going to give them access to all data sources because they're an admin. And we can define or declare their admin through this specific role, the role-admin. So that's going to take care of our administrative security group. Now let's go back to the individual user. So everything's going to be the same. Here we're going to provide our user ID, our object ID from above. And then what we're going to say is their allowed data source types is going to be this DS types, which was this list that we had created here, where we provided them with SQL access. And then what we're going to do is give them a role called connection creator. So this essentially gives them the ability to use this gateway It does not give them the ability to share it, and it does not give them the ability to go ahead and administrate it. So let's go ahead, let's run this specific process now. And this will take just a couple minutes to go ahead and complete. I will pause the recording just so that you're not watching basically a status message. Okay, so that did take, I'd say probably about 3 minutes to install. And so just to give you a rough sense of how long that took. As we can see, it's been installed successfully. If we head over to services, we're going to go ahead and see that we do have a gateway that is now running on this specific machine. And then if we go ahead and head back over to our admin portal inside the Power Platform and we refresh this list, we're going to see that we've got this automated gateway demo. So this was the gateway that we previously installed in the script. That was its name. So notice the contact info does show blank here because this was installed through a service principal, not through the interactive mode. But if you install this through an interactive mode, you will go ahead and see who was the person that created it and subsequently owns the gateway itself. So let's go ahead, let's click on managed users though, because there's some interesting bits here. Remember we talked about putting in that security group that would essentially become an administrator. Well, the name of that security group is called DevOps-Dev, and as a result we can now see that they have admin rights. So anyone that belongs to that security group will go ahead and be able to administrate this specific gateway. Now, the other scenario we talked about was an end user and ensuring that the end user only has the right level of access. In this case, we wanted for them to be able to use the gateway, but not share it and not administrate it. And we also wanted to ensure they had privileges to enable SQL Server. And sure enough, we've got SQL Server. From an RPA perspective, we're going to want to see this checked off, desktop flows, so that they could go ahead and use RPA. So that concludes the demo. Hopefully you found this useful. This will definitely help you be more productive in terms of installing these gateways and enforcing consistency when doing so. So thanks again for checking out this video. Alright, so thanks again for checking out this video. If you're not following me on Twitter, go ahead and find me at Weare. Naturally on YouTube, likes, subscribes, comments are always appreciated. Go ahead and take care of that, please. Alright, we'll talk to you again soon on the channel. Take care.